This is a tutorial on Japanese political society and culture. So let's start with political culture. Um, the country has a very long political continuity in terms of the build of its political community, going back centuries and even millennia, depending on how you count. And in many ways, it's very similar and very different to other global North countries, thinking particularly about the Western ones. Uh, if you look at its political system, there are so many similarities with the United Kingdom, for instance, but there are also a great many differences that we could list. Uh, I've written here traditionally very isolated, and this is of course related to its geographical position, a series of islands in the ocean, very much like the United Kingdom, but even further away from the mainland. So this will of course influence how the political culture has been shaped and how the political community relates to people outside of the political community. I've also listed conservative and collectivist, and drawing upon the long and strong traditions of the political continuity, upon uh, the geographical location and how that has arguably influenced political culture, there are some interesting reactions to political issues of today that would separate Japan from other global North countries. And here the uh, labor shortages is an excellent example. Japan has a demographic challenge, an aging population, low fertility rates, meaning that there's already severe labor shortages, and these will just keep increasing over time because of the low fertility rates. This is a phenomenon that's been seen in other global North countries as well, but it's most acute in Japan. So what happens in other global North countries? Well, you can take a country like Canada, for instance, which solves the labor shortage issues by having a comparatively open immigration policy with labor force immigration and other streams of immigration as well open that can address these labor shortages. This does not happen in Japan. Instead, the common sense solution in the Japanese political community is to use high technologies to improve productivity. The country is a leader in the development of robotics that is even applied in areas such as senior care. And this is notwithstanding the fact that it could very well open the borders for immigration. There is a fairly large, it's surrounded by within fairly close reach within the region, several countries that are quite populous. China, a little bit further away, of course, India. So opening the borders and giving access to the labor market to people from fairly populous areas would not be an implausible solution to address the labor shortages, but it's not something that is currently accepted in the current Japanese political culture. Looking at Japanese civil society, it has some interesting features that both unites it with other global North countries, but also that separates it. Like in Germany, we see in Japan a strong environmental movement, particularly the anti-nuclear movement, which might not come as a very great surprise given the history of the closing months of the Second World War, and now, of course, in more recent memory, the Fukushima, the disaster at the Fukushima nuclear plant. Also, like Germany, there has been a Red Army faction that has been quite militant, but unlike maybe some other global North countries, it has also had a strong streak of millenarianism, which is maybe closer to what you could see in some sects in the United States, religious sects that are talking about the end of the world and so on. And in one case, in fact, in Japan, in recent history, over the past couple of decades, there was a terrorist attack by one of these in the subway using sarin gas that caused quite a few casualties. So it's a mix of these different types of forms of expression, from quite militant ones to groups that really work within the established civic culture and through democratic channels. And Shimin, the community groups, would have to be regarded as one of these, working within the democratic framework type of civil society groups, and have gained greater strength during the last few years. Looking at interest groups, we have some interesting features that really affect network organization. First is the Oyabun-Kobun relationship, kind of a patron-client relationship between politicians and community groups that gain particular significance during election campaigns. Another is the Keidanren, the big business groups, and how these networks between the different business groups have effectively undermined trade unions because the standard format for employment in Japan post Second World War was that the employer will supply you with all the social welfare needs you have. So you get health insurance through the employer, but you also get all sorts of other worker benefits that effectively made trade unions obsolete because the employer already supplied all these different services. And thus the trade unions were undermined by the business coalitions together with the Liberal Party. Now, what's really interesting with Japan, certainly past in the post-war era, is its political economy. So let's go over that. Positioned as it is on an island, it has been, and with a limited area of arable land, it has been dependent on others for food. And of course, the devastation at the end of the war and the US occupation led to a reconsideration of Japan's objectives. So before the war, during the imperialist era, this food dependency was to be solved by military conquest. But having been defeated during the war, that has to be satisfied in some other way. And that has informed the strategic positioning of Japan in the world economy. And so, of course, a great deal of reliance on the US, alignment with the US during the post-war years through the Yoshida Doctrine, and but also the strategic use of protectionism, which for some time led Japan to become the second biggest economy in the world, now eclipsed by China, of course. For the last 2 decades, though, the Japanese economy has really struggled. You've had bank collapses and real estate that has plummeted, and even persistent deflation that has been a problem for Japanese governments. As I mentioned, the Japanese political economy has made use of protectionism, so it has really not been laissez-faire. We can call this the 1955 system, and built on an alliance between the Liberal Party and how the Liberal Party has been assigning different cabinet portfolio according to the different strengths, the different positions of the factions within the party, but also dependent on the historical Iron Triangle, the Zaibatsu, and the current version of this Iron Triangle, the Keiretsu. So let's look at those two. So the Zaibatsu has been a financial clique, a system of financial cliques that probably in other countries might, in other Western European or American style economies, might might intuitively be perceived as cartels in some ways. 12 of these control 80% of manufacturing and finance, and this is what MacArthur tried to dismantle as part of the post-war restructuring. but they reconstituted themselves into a new form of iron triangle called the Keiretsu. And this Keiretsu is an alliance. These Keiretsu are alliances between the LDP, the civil service, and big business groups. So they're reconstituted Zaibatsu. They are key for the real heart of this lies within the construction industry. They are networks of big business groups or conglomerations that are sharing management resources, markets between companies, including banks and real estate functions and so on. And they agree to buy primarily from each other. And this is where this functionality where employees might be less incentivized to join a labor union because they're hired for life according to the traditional formula and get welfare from the employer. Of course, one of the problems in the Japanese economy for the past 2 decades is that this formula, hired for life and get welfare from employer, no longer holds true. Employers can no longer guarantee employees to be hired for life. And if you have a system where the state does not provide social service delivery, uh, but this is done through the employer, well, then there's going to be difficulties for the employees if they no longer can count on being hired for life. This system resulted effectively in an embedded form of mercantilism, where you had government doing careful long-term planning and strategic marketing, and where regulations on international investment kept credit and wealth in Japan. So in a quite real sense related to other economies, there was strong protectionism that kept foreign goods out. This was allowed by the United States during the post-war era because of course, the Cold War. The Americans needed the Japanese on the front line, if you will, against what was developing as the communist bloc, particularly when China became communist and so on. However, this system now, the 1955 system, has really experienced some challenges over the past couple of decades. You had a housing bubble that led to an economic downturn. You have had generational shift towards post-materialist values, which means that there's also less interest in lifetime employment than there previously was. You also have voters that are increasingly more critical of pork barreling and public waste that goes on within the political caste. You have more confrontational public space where these community groups, the shimin, are confronting political leaders more than they had in the past. You have labor shortages because of these continuously close borders, and globalization that exposes these keiretsu that were once protected by these protectionist regimes. They're now exposed to global market forces and have to compete with those. So they have to be successful globally now, not just domestically. And together, all these have, some would argue, exposed poor infrastructure and high levels of pollution in some places and so on, which drives even more critique against this order, the 1955 system. So that's a summary of Japanese political culture and society. I hope you found that useful.